It's time to add another note. If you've been following Cats, Collies, and Gardens, you may be wondering, well, how does this really affect me? What do I have to do as pastor? In the previous 3 videos, Cats, Collies, and Gardens, we talked about the way each church size demands a differing role from its pastors. I realize that more needs to be said about these roles, and specifically where each shift occurs, and how failing to make the shift will bring about congregational decline. When it comes to the growth of any organization, leadership is critical. If you haven't previously viewed Cats, Collies, or Gardens, I think it would be advisable to do that now and then come back here and see how the pieces fit together. To the pastor of a cat. The pastor of a cat will quickly understand that the cat-sized church is a small, very tightly knit family unit. All of the roles in the church are already defined. The patriarch, matriarch, the hostess, the worker bees. The pastor is the single, interchangeable piece. Any pastor can come on Sundays and preach with little effect on the organization. If the sermon is great, they will enjoy it. If the sermon is terrible, they will endure it. If the sermon offends them, they will ignore it. But the organization will not change, not one bit. The wise pastor will realize that their best role is to become a part of the family. The pastor is not and never will be the leader of the church. That role has already been assigned. But as a family member who has earned the family's trust and perhaps love, you do have influence. The wise pastor will become BFFs with the patriarch, matriarch, and happily let that person lead the church, becoming the influencer behind the throne. In this scenario, the family unit stays together. Everyone is happy, and the church is stable. It is possible, though highly unlikely, that after several years of being the pastor of such a church, the church will grow into a more collie-sized church. And because the pastor has served for such a long time, the now more collie-like church will have actual affection for the pastor. But as long as the family roles are still in place, and the power rests in a small group of family members, this is still a cat, as the next pastor will quickly find out. The pastor of a collie will find an entirely different animal. Whereas the cat didn't really care much, the collie cares deeply. Thus, the pastor will find a church that has its emotions showing right from the start. If the previous pastor was negative, scolding, judgmental, the new pastor will find a wounded, defensive animal that will have to be slowly and carefully nurtured, and whose affections must be won over time. If the previous pastor was wonderful, positive, loving, and caring, the new pastor will find a healthy collie who, while disappointed to lose the loving pastor, is eager to discover the same wonderful qualities in the new pastor. In this scenario, the pastor who lavishes love and support on the collie will be warmly received and adored by the collie. The wise pastor will understand that their best role is to feed the collie with real love, affection, and gentle guidance. Unlike the cat pastor, who will likely never be the leader, the collie pastor is the object of the collie's affection. The happy collie lives to please its pastor. Just as the canine can be taught to do any number of things with a gentle instruction, substantial treats, and genuine praise, and real affection, the church collie will respond to all those things as well. Which means, do not expect the collie to know how to do things until you explain them and teach them how to do it. Praise each positive step. Take the time to bring the church leaders into your confidence. Share your vision. Guide them gently as they take on new roles and responsibilities. Then, most importantly, shower them with praise and affection. Over-the-top appreciation is important. Say thank you, often and in lots of ways. Lastly, let the collie love you. I know some pastors who are humble servants to a fault. While this may seem Christ-like, remember Jesus let Mary pour nard on his feet and hair, and he let the crowds shout hosannas on his entry into Jerusalem. Let the collie love you. Graciously appreciate all the love and affection they will shower on you. Accept it and say thank you so much. You are all so kind. they will love you for it. If you do not accept it, they will think their love is not important to you, and they will slowly withdraw it. You do not want that. The major shift between a cat and a collie is understanding who is in charge and what you can and cannot do. The shift up to the collie requires active affection, appreciation, and clear expectations. Those will rarely work on the cat. The major shift between a collie and a garden requires a complete rethink of the role of the pastor. The pastor of a garden. There are two ways to begin pastoring a garden. One, you move as the pastor who is a new pastor to the congregation that is an active garden. The pastor who moves to a garden from a cat or a collie has the more difficult task of training themselves to do the job required. If the pastor's leadership does not change and the pastor insists that the style of leadership they successfully used on the cat and the collie will work fine at the larger church, the church will eventually shrink back to that size, as many members who found meaning and fulfillment in those programs and ministries disappear too. A pastor moving from a cat to a garden must make a quantum leap to successfully lead, nurture, and grow a garden. The cat takes little attention, and there is only one cell to consider when doing ministry. The garden takes a lot of attention on many fronts, and there are multiple crops to be tended. The wise pastor will spend several months prior to the move learning about the church, its ministries, and studying a variety of best practices to lead a church of this size and complexity. The pastor moving from a large collie to a small garden may be lulled into thinking there can't be that much difference between a collie with 90 people in worship and a garden with 110. But the same best strategy applies, reinventing oneself to learn the best practices to lead this size of a congregation. The other way to inherit a garden is you successfully grow a collie into a larger congregation. The most successful strategy for growing a collie into a garden is to make the shift in your pastoral leadership when average attendance moves strongly over 75. In other words, start planting a garden. Start thinking about the church as a multifaceted organism. What is the first crop you want to grow? As soon as that crop begins to look healthy, plant your next crop. Recruit leaders to oversee and help with each crop. Keep feeding the collie, the whole body, but pay careful attention to those new crops which will feed the body going forward. This is the easier way to become pastor of a garden. The pastor develops new skills in planning, recruiting, coordinating, leading, team building, and delegating, while the collie learns to appreciate the increased size and variety of the options of ministry and spiritual growth. New crops you might consider: adding new Bible studies, new Sunday school options, new older adult fellowship opportunities or exercise classes, new community outreach projects, hands-on projects, not donation-only events. Often the new pastor who comes to lead a garden feels overwhelmed by the complexity of the garden and the energy it takes to manage it. The pastor will find an existing group of people who have bonded with and enjoy the leadership of the last pastor. Just getting to know these people and understand their roles, gifts, shortcomings, and interrelationships will seem hard enough, since this is a larger organization than any church the pastor has likely served before. There would seem to be no need to add to this number, which is entirely true if all you want to do is maintain the garden as it is right now. This task will take most of the first year, and that is time well spent. But the single most important aspect of ministry from this point upward to ever larger churches is the active and intentional recruitment of new leaders. The pastor needs to identify, recruit, train, nurture, encourage, direct, feed, recognize, appreciate, and empower new leaders to join a strong team of people who will move the church forward. Once you understand the leaders you have, it will take time to add to their number and begin recruiting more people into leadership. These new leaders can step into existing groups and be mentored by existing leaders. They can also be encouraged to take on new groups, new ministries, and also recruit new leaders to mentor as they grow. This strategy will serve the whole church well and is critical to growing the garden into a house.